Welcome back to another episode of the GM Future Podcast. I'm your host, Louis Duque. I have Elyssa Dixon with me here again on another episode. We recently came back from CRYMC, the Central Region Younger Member Council for ASCE. It's a lot of letters there that it's hard to say, but it was a lot of fun. And Elyssa actually was one of the organizers of the conference, someone that helped plan, and she's the chair of the Community of Younger Members, and obviously doing a lot of things ASCE. So I wanted to bring her back. It was a lot of fun. How are you doing today, Elyssa? And just give us a little background on what you do with ASCE and during your day.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back. I get to talk about two things I'm excited about: mindfulness in the last episode and ASCE in this one.
Yeah.
So I am the current chair of the Committee on Younger Members, as you mentioned, and then I'm also the president-elect for the Seattle section, which is where I'm located. I have been involved with ASCE since 2013, which was right after I graduated. I studied environmental engineering, and there wasn't really a place I felt for me in ASCE in college, with my degree being a little bit peripheral to civil engineering. So I did a different thing in college. And then when I moved back, I was looking for a job and really found ASCE was pretty active here. And I wanted to be involved in some sort of organization, both from a networking perspective to find work, but also I had moved back to Seattle after having been gone for 4 years for college, and I really didn't know that many people in the area anymore. So having it as a space to make friends, and I got really involved with our Younger Members Forum. Was our sports chair for a while, was the president of the Younger Members Forum in 2018, and have moved on to the section level locally. We don't have any branches. If you're familiar with the ASCE structure, it varies a lot throughout the country. And then I got involved with the Committee on Younger Members, I think, as a corresponding member for 1 year, and then I rolled on after that. And time is weird, and I think I joined in 2018, so I feel like that's about right. So I'll be rolling off as chair this fall, and then have 1 more year left on the committee.
Yeah, ASCE is one of those groups that is kind of hard to follow where everything fits. And I think we saw that at the conference too. Like there was a lot of people that were like maybe the first conference with ASCE, and they were trying to figure out where in these big structure they fit as younger members, as the YMC, the Young Member Council. Do you want to just give us a quick overview of like what's CRYMC and why we're all these younger engineers at this place? I know it's combined with YMLS, which is the Younger Member Leadership Symposia, which is usually around this time in the year. I think we combined them this year. So just touch on a little bit, why was that, and how these kind of came together with these two conferences together.
Yeah. So each of the younger member groups in the country falls into a particular region, depending upon where they're located. And we divide those regions into the Western states, the Central states, and the Eastern states. I'm not going to refine it any more than that, but gives you generally a picture. And within each of those groups, we have a younger member council, which is a unique unique organization within an ASCE. It gives younger members a voice within the organization, and it's composed of delegates from each of those younger member groups. So each younger member group gets to send one delegate, which is their representative, to the younger member council. And the younger member council meets once a year to have a business meeting, touch base with each other, and then we generally use that business meeting to pass resolutions, which are an opportunity for younger members to share their voice with what they want to happen in ASCE up the chain. It goes to the board of direction. And these groups could meet more frequently if they wanted to, but in general, it's a minimum requirement that the councils have one meeting each year. And we like to do them in person because that's just, it's nice to see everybody again. And normally they happen with a larger conference that happens in January and February called the MRLC, which is the Multi-Region Leadership Conference. And that happens in the West, the Central, and the East. And the younger members from each of those general zones go to those particular MRLCs, have their business meeting, get to meet with other leaders in ASCE, and share leadership tips, both professionally and within the organization. This year, we did things a little bit differently, as you just mentioned, because COVID was still something we were really concerned about, January, February timeframe, which is when the MRLCs normally would be held. And the committee that plans the MRLCs is CYM helps, but is not the overarching committee that plans. They decided they didn't want to do anything in person because of the concerns of COVID around that time, but they still wanted to do their programming at that time of year. So they kept it virtually in January, February. And that's leadership training for section and branch leaders, like I mentioned. So that's the people not necessarily over 35, but younger members cap around 35. And you can get involved in section and branches earlier or later, depending upon your experience. But those leaders usually come to the MRLCs along with the younger member leaders and then along with the student leaders. So the section and branch leadership kind of decided to do something different. The students decided to do something different as well. They did their leadership trainings as part of the symposia that happened in the spring, where like the concrete canoe competitions happened. And then we said, hey, we'd like to do ours in person if we feel like it's safe. And postponing to the summer gave us more time for some of the variants to settle down a little bit, gave us more space to have time for planning, and then also ideally more outdoor options. We were going to some colder places in certain regions, and being able to spread out and be outside a little bit more was helpful. So we have local planners that help with those events, and we did one in Hartford, Connecticut for the Eastern region in June. We did one in Park City, Utah for the Western region in July, and then you and I were just in Austin for the Central region in August. And that was
those are definitely a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was just going to add on the YMLS element, which you alluded to. So trying to make sure the acronyms come through clearly because there's a lot of them.
Yes.
So the Committee on Younger Members usually helps out with these MRLCs in January and February with some programming. But our big events are during the summer, and we do something called the YMLS, the Younger Member Leadership Symposia, and it is a multi-day leadership training for younger professionals. It's through ASCE, but we don't talk about civil engineering really. We allude to engineering, but it's mostly leadership training and skill sets. So with that normally happening during the summer and trying to push these younger member councils to the summer as well, we thought, hey, let's put it all together and see what happens. And YMLS is usually held at ASCE headquarters in Reston, Virginia. This gave us an opportunity to bring it to different places and get to have more people experience that leadership training. We do something called the YMLS Alumni Summit, which is for people who have attended YMLS in the past. They can come back for like leadership training round 2. And we coupled that with these summer events for the Eastern and the Western regions, because we had enough participation, people coming who had been to YMLS before to have kind of a second track. At the Central region one, we just didn't have as many people who had been to YMLS before, so we decided to do it all together in one and make sure that everybody was on the same page there.
Yeah, that's a lot. Like you say, ASC just has a lot of words that to most people don't mean anything, and it's kind of hard to get used to it. But yeah, I think I've been wanting to go to YMLS since 2019. I think it was the first time I kind of signed up for it, but I didn't end up going. Oh, the 2020 was COVID. 2021 was still a lot of virtual events. So I'm glad I got to go partly this year. I didn't get like the full experience, go to ASC headquarters and everything, but it was a lot of fun. I think that's probably one of the best conferences I attended, just because there was a lot of leadership. There was a lot of like networking and like talking to people, and it was small enough that you kind of get to talk with most of the people in the room. Having everyone in one room kind of help with that. Obviously, being in the same room all day was also tiring, but I think everyone is kind of in a good mood. The exercises and the events were great to just kind of get us out of our comfort zone. They're like teach us some of the things we talk about, like communication styles and how to just collaborate with others, and like what other groups are doing, like how these differences, how some people are successful doing something, what can we learn from these other people. So it's just very interactive, which is great to hear. You obviously probably have been planning this for a long time. What were some of those challenges, and how does one get involved to plan these events, and like, yeah, how did you get here?
Great question. So I attended YMLS in 2017 and loved it. That was one of the reasons I joined CYM, was wanting to get more involved with programming that the committee did, having seen them at some of the other conferences. So I think the first step is finding people who are doing that kind of work already, finding ways that you can get involved and support. For CYM, we have corresponding members, so we pull people in to help with even little tasks along the way. It's not necessarily you have to jump in to support some sort of conference planning by being the lead of the conference. Sometimes local conferences or bigger conferences, they look for volunteers day of to help man things. I know I've done that with, I think it was an APWA conference that came to Seattle. They needed some people to help with like directing people around or check in at different spots or time checking for presenters. So you can look for opportunities to volunteer, and then you get to know the people who are involved with the planning and possibly get more involved later. As our committee, we run from an October to September in a fiscal year cycle with chairs and members. And we do a big fall meeting and a big spring meeting where we do a lot of planning for the year. The fall one, we focus a lot on programming and what we want to see. And I think we'd started having some conversations last fall about what we thought might happen in the coming year. With COVID, it was just a little different. And when we got the curveball thrown that the February events weren't going to be happening anymore, we kind of said, okay, what can we do? We have these events that we normally plan. So we've got our normal calendar. What could we do with them? And just started thinking about how we could make them happen. And one of the things that came up was that the MRLCs that happen in January, February, CYM only does some of the programming, and a lot of it's taken care of by other people. So if we were going to plan a conference ourselves as a committee in the summer, we have to fill the whole thing. We have to do all of the programming and the content. And we do that with YMLS. So it seemed like a natural fit to some extent to pair them together. So we weren't having to create something entirely from scratch. We know the programming's valuable. We've gotten good feedback over it in the past. And it was just a case of kind of reimagining it together in a sort of different format than what we'd normally do. But luckily we were able to go back to conferences that had been planned in the past and say, these were the sessions that worked really well. These are the ones that are staples that we like. Let's see what other people have to say. Maybe there's some new ones that we add. The local planners at each three had the opportunity to bring in local speakers, which was really fun. In Austin, probably one of the better like equity and engineering technical presentations I've seen. On Friday, they talked about the Stitch and Cap project and gerrymandering and the impacts that engineering has on that. So getting to work with the local planners on what they wanted to bring into the conferences too was fun, because we got to meet people or hear things that we wouldn't have known about even if we didn't have those folks involved.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun and a little different representation than you may hear at a more technical conference. And I think that's one of the things I really like about this conference. The first one, I've gone to a lot of like structures congress, which was very technical. There's some leadership and non-technical information in those conferences, but like this one is really the first one that I attended where all of it was non-technical and like guided towards leadership. It's something that I enjoy a lot. Obviously, I speak a lot about that here on the podcast and on social media and everything. What was your favorite part of the conference? Because it felt like really light. There was a music between sessions. Everyone was just kind of talking with each other. I knew some of them. At the end of the conference, you kind of get to meet most of them. Like, what was kind of your favorite part of the conference overall?
I love the energy, which I think you just alluded to with all of that. I had been told that the central region was just a little less engaged than the other regions, just
You
because
told me that too. I was scared.
that's what I'd been told. And I didn't go
Yeah.
into it with necessarily strong assumptions either way with what would happen, but I've been to the Western version of this for 5 or 6 years now, because that's where I live. And so I have certain expectations based on having been to a version of it, and had just been told that there were fewer people who come to the central one and that the energy was a little bit different. And I'm so glad. I felt like I was proved completely wrong with all of that. And I know this was a particularly special conference and that we haven't done it before, but
Yeah.
that's what almost makes it better, is that we had something that we hadn't done before, and the energy was just, everybody was so engaged and so excited to be there and really participating and asking good questions. And in the business meeting, which is where we discuss resolutions, and sometimes that process can be a little confusing because it happens once a year. And if you've never even been to one of those before or understand the structure of ASCE, it's like, why are we talking about this stuff? Where is it going? And the fact that people were asking good questions about the resolutions and thinking critically about the voices of younger members within this organization was just so cool. And I loved getting to meet more people within ASCE. Just there's that initial like barrier broken because you have something in common. And people
Yeah.
who are at a leadership conference within that organization care about being an effective and good leader, and they're doing awesome things back at home. So getting to learn from everybody, I think, was probably my favorite part.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised also by like the energy. Like I was coming into the conference, which is what you told me, which you heard from someone else, obviously, that it was very quiet, like obviously smaller, which I'm sure it still was smaller than the other two, but I felt like the energy was great. Like there was a lot of great people there, just having fun, connecting with each other, networking. We had two social events, and they were a lot of fun. We stayed with everyone, talking and everything. So it was definitely a different conference that I've been before. I was also surprised by the communication style session and how many people were in that expressive quadrant, like the yellow one.
Mhm.
Um, because obviously you think of engineers, you think of people that are very shy, that really just like to work numbers, and like it was surprising. I was think it was about half the people were in that like expressive area. There was a lot of them at the technical or like the analytical one a little bit, and then there were two. But I was just surprised about that. Did you find that surprising based on like your previous experience with these conference, or does that sound about right?
I was not terribly surprised. And that's one of my favorite things about that communication styles presentation. So we have everybody take a quiz that's pretty quick, and then you plot yourself on a graph. And there's 4 communication styles. There's driver, expressive, analytical, and amiable. And they've all got strengths and default modes that need practice and everything. And you would generally think, oh, engineers would fall in that analytical category. That just feels like that it would make sense. And every single time I've either given that presentation myself or sat through it, it's an almost even distribution of people between all 4 of those quadrants. There were probably more expressives than an even distribution, like you said at CRYMC. So that was not as common necessarily, but I still think it was a fairly distributed room. There were people in all categories, in a way that it wasn't like, oh, wow, there's nobody in that corner. There were collections of people in each of those 4 spaces. And I feel like that speaks, it's such a great visual if you're there seeing it, but it speaks so truly to how there is no one type of engineer. There is no one type of person. We can all have different ways of interacting with each other and have different interests, or different ways of thinking about things and have different interests. And I think that's what makes engineering successful too, or people being in civil engineering successful, because if everybody was an analytical communication style, things would get done very differently, and there might be challenges. Just like if everybody was an expressive communication style, there would probably be other challenges. We like need each other to balance it out, both in project management and leadership, but also in just design and problem solving and communicating with the public or communicating with clients, recognizing some of those different communication styles coming into the mix. Or engineers don't work in like engineering isolated bubbles. They work with lots of different types of people. So I think it's cool that there's that distribution, and I've seen it every single time that there's that mix.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, I will have expected it to be kind of distributed, but just kind of seeing it when you are like in the room and like actually seeing the different corners of the room with these people was kind of that, like you said, that visual representation of what engineers really are like. Like there are a lot of people that are expressive, analytical, driven, or drivers, and amiable, and like we're all different. We all have similarities in terms of like we're very technical, but at the same time we are completely different personalities. And again, it was kind of a fun event and a fun session to like witness and like see where everyone kind of was going. And like after you're gonna talk with each of the corners, you kind of find that there's a lot of similarities between these corners. And like you start talking with them like, oh yeah, I think that way, I just work this way, I plan this way. It's very similar and just very, I think, surprising, probably eye-opening to a lot of people that go to these conferences. Let's talk a little bit about the sessions, because they were a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun in all of them. Just gonna give us a rundown of kind of the sessions that they have at CRYMC, which I think is mostly from YMLS, but also a lot of benefits to young engineers.
Yeah, so the majority of the sessions, you're right, they're from YMLS. The only ones that weren't were the business meetings, and then we do roundtable discussions so younger members can share best practices with each other. So we start off with personal visioning workshops. We usually do 2 sessions around that. That's pretty common for the YMLS. So that's a lot of introspection, thinking about your why is really what it comes down to, breaking down what is driving in your life, what is motivating to you, thinking through the value space down into why you value those different values, thinking about mentors and people in your life and how they come into play, what brings you joy, what doesn't. And that exercise has been very impactful for me personally, thinking about kind of my why and starting a business and all of that. And we like to start with some of the introspective elements strategically because everybody's new. It's kind of like if you think about icebreakers, you start with certain levels of icebreakers, and then as people get to know each other more, maybe your icebreakers or you're moving around a little bit more and engaging more. So starting with some of the introspective elements in our individual space, sharing, getting to know each other a little bit more. And then we move into a personal recharge session, which is stress management, kind of building off of some of those personal visioning type sessions, more introspection, but starting to think a little bit about how stress impacts our ability to do work, our ability to live, our personal well-being, etc. And then the schedule for the rest of the conference varied a little bit depending upon the location. We had different start times on Fridays. So we did strategic networking session. We had an effective, planned, and impromptu presentation styles session. We did the communication styles. In CRYMC, we had a local person, like I mentioned earlier, from the city of Austin come to talk about equity and engineering. At the other 2, we had our own kind of D&I sessions mixed in. And I think I hit them all, but I don't have the agenda in front of me, and my brain turned this conference off when I got back from CRYMC.
I remember, your time was a good one.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you mentioned that one.
I did not. Thank you.
That was a great one. Again, I do like those kind of sessions. Let's see. Yeah, and I think communication styles was a great one. I think that was kind of the last day, and then we had the roundtables. So I think overall it was just, again, kind of the topics that I just enjoy a lot. So even though it was long days in the same room with the same people, a lot of networking. As an introvert, I was tired, but these sessions were great and they were entertaining and interactive and everything. So which one was your favorite out of all of those?
Oh man. It's a hard question. I gave the personal vision and the personal recharge ones at all 3. So I think those have a special place in my heart because of how the personal visioning one has impacted me. But I originally developed the personal recharge session in 2019, and it's morphed a little since then. But it acted as somewhat of a catalyst for me starting to think about teaching people about mental health, because I wasn't doing my business and mindfulness stuff in 2019. But I really love the impromptu speaking to some extent from a watcher, because we have an element as part of that where we spin a wheel and we make people come up and practice their public speaking skills. And I love pushing people outside of their comfort zone in a safe space like that, because I think that that's how you grow. And we've put that session, at a point at which people are more comfortable with each other. There's an energy there, like, of trust, and everybody, you're not going to fail getting up to talk about some lowball topic that we try to give people to speak on. But I remember attending YMLS in 2017 and being absolutely petrified that I was going to have to public speak. I was like, no way, I am not impromptu talking. There's zero, like, no. And now now I love public speaking, and I'm way more comfortable with it than I ever was. So to me, that's a very obvious point for myself of, like, growth. But being able to see other people either push themselves and volunteer to do it, or struggle with it but get through it, and know that, like, that's a stepping stone, that's the first step for them to, maybe they'll never public speak a ton like I do, but it's still breaking the ice a little bit and being like, this is doable and everybody can do this, and we're all going to support you while you try that. And I think it's cool to be a part of that and get to see it. One of the things that I want to highlight from those sessions that you've mentioned as well, and if you are somebody who plans conferences or thinks about planning conferences, one of our goals with all of the sessions is that they are interactive. And we aim for, like, out of an hour session, 20 minutes of it where the presenter is not speaking is generally the goal. And that varies a little bit depending on the topic. But we know that attention spans are only so long. We know that this is a long day of programming. We want people to meet each other. We want people to mingle. We want people to think and try and learn. And there's one slide in the effective presentation slide presentation that talks about learning styles. And not everybody learns in the same way, just like the communication styles are different. So I think to plan and make any sort of effective learning and engagement conference, you have to address all of those different learning styles. And the vast majority, I think it's about 60%, are visual learners. And then you have a smaller percentage that's auditory, and then like 5% or so that's experiential. And yeah, you could hit all your visual learners, or you could hit 60% of your audience by having a visually exciting presentation, and hit your auditory learners by speaking well or in an engaging way. But then you're missing that 5% on the experiential side. And I think people bounce back and forth between those a little bit, but thinking about it from that lens of, how do we make this a session that everybody is going to get something out of? And that's one of the magical things I think about YMLS too, is that we're really intentional about creating engaging content that gets you up out of your seat, like going and doing activities and meeting folks, or having introspective, reflective time mixed in with it all.
Yeah, and I'll say if I had been to this company in 2019, like if I was originally going to go, I'll have been terrified of speaking in front of all that people. Obviously, 3 years down the road, I have had a podcast for a couple of years, practiced a lot, talked to a lot of strangers on the internet, and given a few presentations in the process. So I feel like I was pretty comfortable for the most part. I still, as someone that speaks, you always get nervous when you're in front of people, but I felt a lot more comfortable. And I think that's, obviously, I've been doing this for a little while, a couple of years, the podcast and everything, but I think a lot of people, even that may not have that experience of public speaking before entering the conference, I think you could tell that they were just more comfortable. Again, like you said, having everyone just network with each other. You're just kind of sitting there with friends. You weren't really sitting there in front of strangers speaking in public. So I think that's kind of a great element of the conference overall, just kind of getting people to just speak in public. And like you said, just kind of get them involved. And people were, like the presenter, calling out people if they not want to volunteer. So it was just very interactive, and I think a lot of people appreciated that, and I definitely did, just getting to know others from networking one-on-one, or just from hearing their stories and what they're doing in the groups and everything. Do you have any last piece of advice for anyone just attending the conference, how to just make the most out of these events? They're short, they're fast-paced, and there's a lot of information that gets thrown around.
Yeah, I think knowing yourself going into a conference is probably the most important part. So if you are somebody who's an introvert and gets like really overwhelmed by that many people, give yourself space, give yourself breaks. It's okay to leave, go on a walk outside and come back in and re-engage, or go to the bathroom and be on your phone for 5 minutes and come back. Or if you are an extrovert, like dive all in. And I think that recognizing that so that you have some awareness of like when you're getting burned out, when you're running low, you can take care of yourself and be able to fully engage. If there's handouts or something that they're giving you, look at them, engage with them. If you're being given the opportunity to participate in some sort of written activity or get up and mingle activity, put your phone away, engage with it, be there, and then you're going to get at least the most out of it that you can in that moment. I think sometimes we learn things in retrospect. We're thinking about them and go, oh my gosh, I have that question about that presentation, or that thing makes sense and connects with this thing. Making sure you get contact information for presenters so that if you do want to follow up afterwards, you can. Anything else that's happening in your life can wait for the most part while you're at a conference. So if you're there, be there. I think that's probably the most important thing to get the most out of it. Also, don't be afraid to make mistakes, to be a little bit goofy when you're talking to people, and practice being able to, I don't know, sell yourself a little bit if you feel like you're in that kind of conference where you're trying to network for very particular reasons. Know why you're there. If it is a technical conference, maybe you're trying to get something out of it different than just friendships, which feels more like a YMLS type thing. So having some self-awareness and intentionality is probably best tips.
Yeah, that's great. I do have a couple of people that came talk to me saying that they listen to the podcast and they enjoy it and they seem interested in me. So that's always feels nice to hear that other people listening. And it's the second conference in a row that someone kind of approaches me and tells me that. So it's getting out there and people listening. So that's always fun. And I enjoy going to these conferences and just talking with people, getting to know people from other regions and doing different things. And it's just always a lot of fun. I have one last question for you. I asked you this last time, so I'm curious to hear how that has changed in, I think, 6 months ago or a little more when I interviewed you last. And that's how can we continue engineering our future?
Oh man, getting deep, hard hitting stuff at the end here. I think that a lot of it almost comes back to the same thing that I just said about going to a conference: awareness and intentionality. Having that self-awareness so that you know who you are. It's an evolving process, who we are, but being able to know that and practice it and learn it and question yourself, and do things with some intentionality behind them. It doesn't mean you have to have a defined plan and everything's going to fill in a box or check a box or something. But if you have some foundation of what's important to you, it makes decision making a lot easier. Not always, but sometimes. And it's something you can revisit with that awareness element. But if you know a little bit of where you're going, even in a high level, this is what's important to me kind of sense, I think it can help a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think last time we talked about mindfulness, just being more present. We talk about how to deal with stress, some of the practices and everything. So definitely a lot of things that help us as engineers, as humans struggling with stress and everything. So it's always fun to see how those kind of answers vary depending on the topic we're speaking on, the episode, the person, and everything. Obviously, there is not a right or wrong answer for that question. So it's always fun to see what other people have to say. Where can people find you online? Just reach out to you if they have any questions, if they want to join ASCE and be part of the committee and younger members, if they want to just connect with you and learn more about you.
Yeah, so my business is Fleece and Forest, so fleeceandforest.com. I'm on social media. Instagram, probably at Engineering Your Mind, is the best one these days. And my email address is different for my business and for ASCE, but I will switch them over depending upon what topic you want to email me about. But Elyssa at fleeceandforest.com.
Yeah, that sounds great. And again, thank you so much for coming back to the show and sharing all the things that you're doing with ASCE. It's definitely a lot of fun to see how much you care about these people and how much you care about their lessons in life and how much you care about just making them grow in their career. So really appreciate talking to you today, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you really enjoyed this episode of the Engineering Future podcast, you're going to love the content we have over our website at luisfelipeduque.com. You can find the link in the description of this episode, as well as the show notes at luisfelipeduque.com/podcast. Every episode comes packed with a lot of links, a lot of information. So you can find all the show notes and all the information related to this episode over at luisfelipeduque.com/podcast. Thank you so much for coming back to this episode. Thank you, Jack Winters, for the music. And as always, let's continue engineering our future.